seated. Mr. Smith, cross-examination.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Coons, do you have a copy of the general orders up there, specifically 327.01 dealing with the silent alarm?
No, sir.
Do you remember those general orders?
Not every one verbatim, no.
Do you remember the Part B of those general orders?
If you could refresh my memory.
That all main exits should be guarded so as to prevent the escape of any offender?
May I see the document, please?
Yes, Matt Brooks, witness.
Yes, sir. You're reading
B.
B.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
So that's number 2, right?
That's B.
That's the second part of the general orders under silent alarm, isn't that correct?
It is.
That all main exits should be guarded so as to prevent the escape of any offender, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And that makes sense as part of a general order for a silent alarm, which refers back to open structure, because the police wouldn't want anyone to escape while they are investigating that open structure, is that correct?
Not necessarily. And notice it says should, not shall.
What I'm asking is, why is that order there?
Well, again, it's a general order. It gives general instruction to their officers on how to approach that type of call. And that's why it says should and not shall.
But why is it there? It's to prevent people that are in that structure from fleeing, correct?
It is there to give general guidance to their officers.
But what is the general order? What message is it giving to the officer that's studying it, reading it, and acting out on it?
It's giving them information on how they should handle the call.
And that information is to guard the exits so that people cannot flee from the structure. Isn't that correct?
That's one thing for the officers to consider, yes.
But isn't that the general message of the second part of the general order dealing with silent alarms?
That's the message, and that's why it says should and not shall.
So that way the officers can just have it out to act however they want? Is that it?
Oh, absolutely not.
But they can just pick and choose, should, shall, whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter as long as they get the general gist of it. You're going to grade those papers and give these officers a passing grade. Isn't that correct?
Well, this isn't a test in the abstract. This is real life.
It is real life, and somebody lost their life. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And somebody lost their life because of the decisions this defendant made in the early morning hours of October 12, 2019. Isn't that correct?
The decisions made by the defendant and the decisions made by Ms. Jefferson.
We'll get to that here in a minute. Okay, so now I'm going to get back to this OODA loop. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
How long, when you discuss the OODA loop and someone is observing and someone is orienting and then someone makes a decision, it doesn't just automatically happen that they act on it immediately. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
I mean, there's some time that takes place. There's some time that passes. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Between the decision to act and to act. Generally, how long does that last, especially when you're dealing with officer-involved shootings?
It depends.
Haven't you testified before that decision usually lasts anywhere from a second, a third, to a second and a half?
It can, yes.
Now, so, may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Just so that,
Excuse me.
you remember testifying in August of 2018 in Dallas County?
I do.
And in that testimony, sworn testimony, right? Sworn to tell the truth. Isn't it true that you said that according to the OODA loop and the research that you have, whenever the officer is orienting, then makes the decision, that it's anywhere from a second and a third to a second and a half for that officer to stop?
It depends.
Or act.
It depends on the situation. Situational. Now, if you're talking about this event is entirely different than this event here.
So you're saying that the event itself can rewrite the neurological aspects of the human brain and the human nervous system that delay reaction times when a person intakes information and then decides to act. Are you saying that?
Can you put that in a little simpler terms, please?
Sure. The act that the person's going through doesn't change the hardwiring of the person's brain, does it?
It doesn't change the hardwiring of the brain. What it does, what changes is the person's ability to react to it. In other words, a simple stimulus will elicit a faster response. Now, more complex the decision is, the longer it's going to take. Now, this area of research started out probably in the late 40s and 50s with the traffic crashes. Basically, how long did it take people to take their foot off the throttle and put it onto the brake? What they found is that if the driver knew it was coming, it took them a lot less time to take the foot off the throttle, put it on the brake. If it was a surprise to the driver, it took them longer.
Okay, so now let's get back to officer-involved shootings. I mean, you testified previously that in your OODA loop, that an officer in an officer-involved shooting, from the minute they take in the information, from the instance that they take in the information and decide to act, that action to follow through with it can take anywhere from a second, a third, and a second and a half. Isn't that true?
Well, again, it's not my OODA loop, it's Colonel Boyd's OODA loop. I'm utilizing it. And again, the scenario is the same, the hardwiring of the brain is the same. However, that timing is going to vary based on the incident.
Are you a neurological scientist?
Oh, no.
So let's get back to this. You testified previously. Isn't it true that you've testified previously that the instant that the decision is made in the brain, for that action to be followed through, it takes a second, a third, and a second and a half? Isn't that true that you testified previously to that information?
In that particular case, given the circumstances of that case, based on the research that I have reviewed, in that case, yes, it took that time.
It took a second, a third, and a second and a half for that officer to decide to stop shooting and then get that message to his hand. Is that right? And then to stop shooting.
In that event, yes.
So someone is shooting, pulling the trigger over and over again, and to decide to stop from, and you talk about ping pong balls and all this other stuff, but it takes a second, a third, and a second and a half, according to your sworn testimony in 2018, for that message to get to the hand and for the hand to then do what the brain is telling it. Isn't that correct?
Given that situation, that's entirely different from this situation, yes.
Are you saying that Officer Dean's brain and nervous system and muscle reactions react any differently than the person you testified for in 2018?
Well, I'm sure there are probably some minor differences because people, depending on their age, a number of other factors, their reaction times differ. My reaction times at 68 are going to be a lot slower than Dale's is here. So that can vary, if that answers your questions.
Well, again, you didn't do any studies on this other guy you testified for, did you?
How do you mean studies?
Well, you didn't do any neurological studies to test his reaction time, did you?
I'm not qualified to do neurological studies.
But yet you testified under oath, again, a second, a third, and a second and a half for the human brain to make that decision and then for the result to happen in real life.
Given the science that I've reviewed and researched and placing that science onto that event as it happened at that time, yes.
So, you said earlier whenever the defense attorney was asking questions that Officer Dean, the defendant, was still doing his investigation. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you hear Officer Dean testify that he'd made up his mind that this was a burglary in progress whenever he first looked into those open doors of the residence on East Allen Avenue?
Well, he testified to a few different opinions on that.
Did you hear him say yesterday morning that he looked into those open doors on East Allen Avenue and decided that this was a burglary in progress?
I also heard him say that it could have been a burglary in progress.
Did you hear him say yesterday morning/afternoon when he testified under oath that when he looked in those doors, he thought that it was a burglary in progress, that he'd already made up his mind?
Among other responses, yes.
But he did say, you didn't hear him say that?
I believe so.
Okay. All right, so that would mean that the investigation's over, isn't that correct?
No, it wouldn't, because as I testified, he testified that there were several other responses there too. It could have been other things. He testified that he didn't know what he had at that time.
I'm not talking about what you believe is reasonable after looking at everything after it happened. I'm talking about what the defendant testified to under oath yesterday. I mean, are you calling the defendant a liar?
What I'm saying is, he testified to many things.
Are you calling the defendant a liar?
No, not at all.
Okay, so if the jury remembered what he said about when he made up his mind, that would be what they need to remember. Is that correct?
Well, they would need to remember all his testimony, all the testimony that occurs here.
But if he said he made up his mind, should they ignore what he said?
Oh, I didn't say that.
Okay, so that's important too, right?
And he also said other things.
Okay. So, again, you testified, I mean, him parking down the street, whatever, Officer Darts pull up to the wrong house, that's fine, but is it great police work if you're trying to conceal your approach to a home to walk straight across diagonally an intersection?
Well, again, conceal probably is not the good term here. It's to be less conspicuous, because again, this isn't a SEAL operation. This isn't Army Rangers here. They're trying to keep a lower profile in approaching this scene where they don't know quite what's going on.
Would you agree with me that walking straight diagonally across that intersection is the most non-conspicuous way to cross that intersection?
Can you pull that picture up for just a minute, that aerial?
Sure.
Now, if you'll notice, the house is set back from the mosque. When they crossed that intersection, they couldn't be seen by somebody in that house. The mosque blocks the house.
I understand that you're giving them the excuse for that now, but at the scene, when we're talking about what the officers reasonably knew at the time, that wasn't the best way to cross that intersection, was it?
Your Honor, may I approach that?
Can you use this laser pointer?
Oh, okay. Thank you, Your Honor. Okay. We're talking at night. If I remember correctly, they were, parked here or here?
The south side of the street, which would be the lower part of the intersection,
right here.
close to the bottom of the picture.
Well, again, they're going to have to get there somehow. Now, as you can see, if you're drawing a line here, a lot of that is excluded from view of the house. So basically, when they're here, they're not going to be able to see the house. If they can't see the house can't see them. They're going to have to get across there. The marked unit is already here. So it's basically just a non-starter. Did they walk this way? Did they walk this way, then this way? Did they walk this way and across here? Basically, they got across the intersection, and that was just fine.
I mean, you've been talking about, silent alarms have been talking about all week, this open structure. Have you testified before that walking down the middle of a street for an officer is not the best idea if that officer is attempting to conceal his presence?
if the officer's attempting to conceal his presence, walking down the middle of the street isn't the best thing,
Is not the best thing.
is not the best thing. I would say so,
Okay, so concede that part.
in that case.
All right, so now, as the officers approached the house, were you aware that, you heard us yesterday, were you aware that 4 adults were across the street?
That's what I heard.
Would it have been reasonable to expect an officer to notice 4 grown adults sitting across the street from a house that they're going to approach?
It depends on a number of things. It depends on lighting conditions. It depends on how much moonlight there is. It depends on what's going on there. Their attention is probably on this structure. Now, by the way, which house are we talking about?
The closest one?
This one right here. So they're coming up from this direction. If there are people here, is it possible that they saw them? Yes. But there are a number of factors which may make them more able or less able to observe those individuals.
Wouldn't you want any police officer you train to be as observant as possible?
Yes.
And wouldn't you want any police officer you train, if they're coming up on an open structure call after 2 in the morning, to notice any other people that may be in the neighborhood?
What I'd want them to do is have a good 360 view.
And in that 360 view, wouldn't you want them to know if there are other people standing around in the neighborhood?
I would certainly want them to make that effort, yes.
Okay. So now we get up to the front door of the home on East Allen, Yolanda's house, and you're perfectly fine with them standing in front of that front door.
They didn't stand in front of the front door.
You're perfectly fine with their presence for however short it was in front of that front door.
Well, it's as I explained to the jury, the way in which they scanned the interior, given the nature of that call, they had to cross that threshold to get to the other side to go around to the B side. The way they did it, again, given what they had, was just fine.
And wouldn't you agree with me? You've investigated a lot of burglary calls, isn't that correct?
Yes,
I mean, and in the olden days, TVs used to be one of the heaviest items of furniture in the house, isn't that correct?
absolutely.
But TVs aren't that way anymore, are they?
Depends on the TV.
I mean, did you see the flat screen TV in Tatiana Jefferson's home?
I didn't see it in her home, no.
You didn't see it sitting there in the living room?
I haven't been inside the residence.
Have you seen the crime scene photos?
Yes,
Did you see the crime scene photos?
I did.
And it was still right there on the stand where it would have been if someone was watching TV on the couch. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And wouldn't you expect an officer to notice that if they think there's a burglary going on, that the electronics have not been taken?
Well, they may not have been taken yet. They might be looking for other smaller objects. Grab the TV at the last thing. Because, think about it for just a minute. That's the largest, bulkiest item. When they start toting that out of the house, the neighbors are going to take notice, and that's when the cops might get called. That's probably going to be the last thing they take out.
You're exactly right. Do you think that's why Officer Dean testified? He thought the people that were doing the bad things, the burglars, were still in the house?
Well, again, he testified that he really hadn't made many decisions on that.
No, he testified he made a lot of decisions. So is that what you're saying, that the TV still sitting there contributed to the defendant thinking that the burglars were still inside the house?
What I'm saying is it's really not a factor of whether they're there then or not. It just might be the fact that they hadn't got to the TV yet.
Because they're still in the house digging up other stuff, right?
Possibly.
And I mean, and that's kind of what the defendant was saying yesterday, that these burglars could still be in the house. He's already making up his mind that the bad guys are in the house, correct?
No.
Are you saying that's not what he said yesterday?
That's one of many things he said.
Okay, so he said that yesterday, correct?
Among many other things, yes.
He said that yesterday, correct?
Among many other things, yes.
Okay. So we get to the second door, and you're fine with the way they fast clear that second door, correct?
Well, they didn't. That's not a fast clear. What you're doing is you're moving across a fatal funnel, and they did it just fine. They looked inside. They didn't see a threat because, again, at this point in time, they still don't know what they have. It could be something. It could be nothing. So the way in which they did it, given those circumstances, is just fine.
I mean, but who's guarding the front door at this point?
No one.
No one's guarding the front door.
That's correct.
Okay. So then they move past a window right there on the side of the house. Do you realize that?
I don't believe there is a window on the side of the house.
On the side of the house?
I don't believe unless you want to show me.
Can I approach witness, Your Honor? Oh, right there. State's Exhibit 52.
Okay.
What's that over the kettle grill?
Yep, that's a window.
So you were mistaken when you said there weren't any windows on the side of the house. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So, is that another fatal funnel?
Yes.
Did they attempt to look in that window?
Don't believe that they did.
So that window is, are you fine? I mean, you said they had to check the windows in the back. Are you fine with skipping that window in State's Exhibit 52?
They literally might not have seen it.
Okay, so they didn't see the people outside. They didn't see the window right there in State's Exhibit 52. What's that a reflection of in State's Exhibit 52? That on in the window.
In my experience, I guess that was the flash of the camera, but it could be anything.
Could be anything. So if they're rooting around, do you remember it in the body cam? May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
I've paused State's Exhibit 1 at the 18-second mark. Would that show the defendant's body cam pointed right at that window? That same one?
It's covering the window.
Would that, if it's right in the middle of State's Exhibit 1, and I can pull this up on the big screen, maybe we should do that.
Mm-hmm.
So you saw the body cam come around the corner of State's Exhibit 1, and what was right in front of the body cam when the defendant came around the corner?
Looks as though there's a window, and it looks like there's a blind covering the window.
I understand that, but are you going to say that maybe they missed that window, they didn't see that window? That's still your answer?
Given those light conditions, I would say they should have seen that window.
Okay. So if they saw that window, then you would expect them to give that same attention to that window that the defendant gave to the window in the backyard. Isn't that correct?
Should have.
But they didn't, did they?
Well, if it's fully covered by a blind,
I understand that, but they should have, shouldn't they?
what I'm saying is they need to give the amount of attention to each one of these that requires. If this one is covered by a blind, you can check for entry by, tool marks, things of this nature, by looking at it. You can get up a little closer, but you can look at it. You don't have to get right up on it.
They didn't check that window, did they?
I don't know about that. Because remember what Mr. Frederick said. The camera's pointed one way, but the officer can be looking one way or the other way.
Did they check that window? Did the defendant check that window with the same intensity that he checked the window in the backyard?
From this, we can't tell.
From State's Exhibit 1, you want to watch it again?
No. From what you got right there, what I'm saying is we don't know how long the officers took looking at the window.
What do you mean you don't know? It's right there. It's on video.
What
You're saying the video is not correct?
I'm not saying that.
Should they have checked that window? Yes or no?
I'm not saying they didn't check the window.
Okay. So you think they might have checked the window, but you don't know for sure?
It's possible that they did. It's possible they didn't.
You don't know, even by watching the video, whether they did or didn't.
Well, let's watch the video.
Okay.
Okay, can you stop? If you'll notice, when he walked by the window, the camera moved slightly to the left. That could very well indicate that he looked at the window. He was within what appeared to be a couple of feet of it. As Mr. Fredericks testified, it could look closer than it actually is. Be nearer than it actually is.
Actually,
So-
aren't they farther away?
No, it's closer.
Objects are closer than they appear?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So it's
That's what I'm
entirely
saying, they're farther away. Yeah.
it's entirely possible that that camera movement that we just saw was Officer Dean looking at the window, seeing it was covered with a blind, so he's not going to gain much by going over there and trying to look into it. But he can look at tool marks, things of this nature, and they moved on. They had an entire structure to cover.
You're saying he probably checked that window for tool marks?
From what I see from that video, it's entirely possible.
And if one of your trainees did this down at Harris County, you would have gave them a passing grade for checking that window for tool marks, if you
Well-
saw this video.
Again, I'm not grading my folks. This is real life.
And this is real life good police work that you've seen so far.
So far, this has been good police work, yes.
Can you tell me exactly, I mean, you reviewed the defendant's training manuals, haven't you?
How do you mean training manuals?
What he was taught in the police academy, isn't that correct?
The course descriptions, yes.
And what all have you reviewed for this case?
A number of things. Certainly the video, the investigative reports, investigative photos, pretty much everything, again, that I received.
Is there anything specific in what you reviewed where Fort Worth PD instructs the officers not to verbally announce their presence on open structure calls?
Is it in writing? No.
Is there anything that you reviewed in writing, any handbook, any general order, any instructions that where Fort Worth PD tells its officers not to verbally identify themselves at an open structure call?
I would say that there is.
Where is it?
It's in the general approach to crime scenes.
Where did you find that?
It's scattered throughout Fort Worth PD policy. They're basically stating, and you can check several of them, that when you're approaching a possible crime scene, use caution.
Use caution,
Yes.
but it doesn't say not to announce yourself.
Well, when you're announcing yourself, you're not using caution.
Again, is there anywhere in writing where you answered this question earlier, is it anywhere in writing specifically that states that Fort Worth officers should not or shall not verbally identify themselves when on an open structure call?
On an open structure call, in that verbiage, no. However, it is strongly intimated through several other parts of the Fort Worth PD general orders to be cautious in approaching crime scenes.
But there's
To
nothing.
be careful. Excuse me, I'm not done with my answer.
Wait. I'll decide that.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Smith.
There's nothing in writing that says don't verbally identify yourself at an open structure call, is there?
But it's strongly suggested in other parts of the manual.
There's nothing in writing that says, don't verbally identify yourself on an open instruction call. Correct. Is that right?
In those words for that particular call, no.
Okay. So, after you say that they have sufficiently investigated this window, where did the officers go next?
They check the vehicles.
And you said they did a great job checking those vehicles.
Given those circumstances, yes, it was adequate.
So what about whenever he turned his flashlight on? Isn't that announcing his, isn't that telling everybody where he is if he turned his flashlight on?
It could be.
Just a minute ago, you were saying, I mean, you told me you weren't done, that, hey, they got to use caution. Don't let anybody know you're there. But this time, whenever he shines his flashlight, that's perfectly okay.
No, you're misconstruing my words. I said they needed to use caution. In caution, you're making decisions based on what you're seeing, based on the overall circumstances. They needed to look inside those cars. They briefly illuminated the cars to check inside them for a victim or for a suspect. It's a balancing of risk.
So you're saying that it wouldn't have been reasonable for those officers to knock on that front door when they first got to East Allen Avenue?
No.
You're saying it would have been reasonable to open that screen door and check and see if there were pry marks for the inside of the screen door?
No.
Are you saying it would have been reasonable to open the screen door and ask if anybody's home inside?
Not at that point, no.
Are you saying it would not have been reasonable to knock on that side door?
No.
Are you saying it would not have been reasonable to call back to dispatch and ask about the cars that were in the driveway since the call text gave details about the car?
Well, it's a great point. They could have done that. The problem of it is that takes time. It takes time to get on the radio because you have other units using that same frequency, so you have to wait. Then the dispatcher has to run those tags. It takes a few minutes. Then the dispatcher, while she's handling other calls, has to relay that information back to the officers, so it's taking time.
Are these officers getting paid by the investigation or something? Why does time matter if they want to do a good, thorough job?
They want to do a good, thorough job. They want to make through this, and they want to get through this, and they want to find out what's going on. So again, it's a balance. There's a lot of things you can do. What is the importance at that point in time of running the license plates when you've already checked to make sure that there isn't a victim, there isn't a suspect inside those vehicles? Now you move on with the Fort Worth policy of checking the exterior of the structure.
The same Fort Worth policy that says, we've already gone over, the same one that also says, all main exit ways should be guarded so as to prevent the escape of any offender.
Should.
Should. All main exit ways should be. So that's not that important to you.
Oh, I didn't say that.
I mean, when they went over these cars, is the front door wide open? Is it under guard?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Is the side door under guard?
They're in that vicinity.
Okay. But it would have been reasonable if they decided to call dispatch to ask about the cars.
In my experience, I'd say it's a lower priority.
Okay. Would it have been reasonable to call dispatch to ask to get more information from the caller?
For what purpose?
To find out more information. Are these in fact the cars? Do you know, the caller had said, do you know, the owner is usually home at this time. Do you know if the owner is actually home at this time? Would that have been good information to have?
At that point in time, they're already on the scene, so it would have been better that they turn their attention to actually checking that structure, as Fort Worth policy states.
Was the house going to get up and run away?
No, but somebody inside it could have.
What door were they going to run out of?
Don't have to run out of the door.
So, you're saying they're still building their investigation But you're also saying they have to work quickly because the bad guy can still be in the house. Is that right?
What I'm saying is they don't know quite what they have, and they're trying to run it to ground. They're trying to gain information.
That's my point. So wouldn't it have been a good idea to contact the person that called the police in the first place to get some more information?
That